Back playing Gwent again. I just recently collected more cards. These decks are representatives of the 6 stages of grief. I'll be introducing them backwards. Acceptance means that you've seen the light, or just the solution, which is usually money. This deck however doesn't need much since Firesworn cards don't rely too much on coins. Now let's talk about Philippa. You see, coins in Gwent are actually invulnerable. Despite of the 9 coins limit, it's enough to piss me off when Philippa shows herself. I understand the logic that sees a 12 for 10 at max, but seizing a 9-point unit is just too much. So why is Philippa the exception? Why is Vadier still shitty when theoretically he can seize a 100 powered great sword? The answer is that coins are supposed to be hard to earn, but out of fear of cards breaking, the devs made sure to make a lot of profit. So seizing a 9 powered unit becomes a mean joke. For those who never played Syndicate, Philippa would look like a 21 for 10 because coins look worthless, just like when countries print out too much paper in the economy. Even Syndicate players would agree with this analogy, and here's why. For a Syndicate player, we understand that coins need to be materialized, and we have 0 coins from the start, so our opponents always have the lead. When the scores gap is too much, we would lose the round because we couldn't keep up. For other players, coins look worthless because it's almost always available. So when cards spend coins, it just looks like they're getting a freebie on top of their existence. It looks unearned. So the dilemma here is that converting 9 coins into a 9 powered unit plus 3-10 props is just an okay move because Syndicate has cards that can do much better for less coins, but for other players we just lost a 9 powered unit. It's what a lot of people forget. You can't just yoink something so big without earning it.
Yes, you!
And that's the kicker, whether you like it or not, it actually was earned. Here's why Syndicate isn't dominating anymore. Using a Firesworn deck doesn't cost a lot of coins, but they also don't produce enough coins as well. This deck made it hard to use Philippa, and I barely made more else work too. In fact, I only added them to make my point. So regardless of what you think about the faction, it too has its own strengths and weaknesses. The point here is that other cards with Cs are designed to be unplayable to some degree, while Philippa, due to how her faction is designed to not brick at all, will not brick as well, and that's why it's bullshit. Bullshit has many forms. It's not always something that's advantageous, and in Scoia'tael's case it's actually something detrimental. I'm talking about Symbiosis. When compared to Old Harmony, this ability just sucks. Sure, it's possible to get 4 or more extra points per turn, but it's at the cost of filling up your rows to the brim, and when you fight against Nilf GR the process of locking yourself out of the game becomes faster. Also, the 13 unit limit in making decks made sure that you can't even maximize Symbiosis, so when you run out of space, you have no choice but to discard, and even if there was no limit, you can't even produce more treants as well. That's what SC was reduced to. Harmony can be overwhelming back in the day, but the problem then was that the other factions were just weaker. This is why buffs are more important than nerfs. The more options players have, the more variety of cards will see play, and meta would not be formed within the week.
I've no problem wasting my time as a cormorant. Yet
I shall be up. Stars content. You do the Tis mine.
what is true?
Do I enjoy it?
Enough! Let us finish!
All beside. Lie still.
See what I mean? Look at those 2s and 3s. Still, I would have won the game here if I just used my leader ability, but the uncertainty of the opponent having a tall remover prevented me to do so. The argument of just boosting everything will not work as well, because if I was facing against Skell, like, the wideness of my army is just a prime target for Wild Boar and Hemdall. Heck, even Lambert and Lacerate could have shifted the score in one turn.
Novigrad's a real deal!
Drink, child. Let the war.
Blue mostly represents sadness, and in the North's case, It's depressing to see that there's almost nothing new, even after taking a break for 6 months. Sure, there are new cards and mechanics, but the key cards we rely on are still just the same. Duel, Luck Ache, and only some of the cards with orders are barely viable at the moment. Unfortunately, despite of its consistency in using of almost the same cards which usually leads to mastery, Northern decks could barely compete in this expansion. Of course I was having fun with cards like Siege, but after the meta was set it could bear catch up and wiping the board became impossible. That's why in this deck I tried using Firaxis and so far, so good. Although, he still pales in comparison to Roche and Blue Stripes, like fuck dammit. The only thing that could stop this combo is Nilf Giard's lockdown. Although, it's also viable to carry Igna with you, but that card surprisingly bricks most of the time, and no one's stupid enough to stack a bunch of 4s in a single round.
To get our head.
Like you'll have more luck with Skyrim. Repeating the combo with Pavita makes it annoying as well. People may have problems with Ethereal, but Luck Ache is at least an instant 20 points.
We follow.
That's bullshit.
With me, you'll forget your sorrows.
Mill is just so funny. I barely survived this game, but having the commandos just makes the job easier.
To get our head.
Copying the frigates may have frustrated him since NG could barely survive round 3 and they just hope that your hand is shitty.
Task.
Salutations.
Doc.
Temeria had...
Curse these Delving.
Now I'm gonna have to call out my favorite faction. I have a million reasons why Double Ball is okay, and another million why Bribe is just as okay too. But my favorite reason is that it's not as easy as you think. It's the same reason why people hate coins, it's earned, and those who have no idea think it's unearned. Nilfgaard's problem from day one of Homecoming has always been RNG. Now why is this faction still the favorite faction among all others despite how RNG in this game sucks? The answer is that there are a lot of smart people who play the game, regardless of what faction you like to use. Everyone tries to solve problems in the decks that they're using, and NG with all of its randomness and despite having the majority of their cards being unusable, people still try to experiment and solve its problems, and this faction doesn't run out of problems. That's why players will most likely not move on to the next faction and the pool of NG players will just increase. So for those who wonder why people play NG despite of them losing a lot, it's not about winning the most in this game. The statistics are already screwed to begin with if you have 1000 players using NG versus 100 players using Scale Light. It's about finding that one answer to the problem they want to solve, and it only takes one win to validate the solution.
Follow me!
That one win matters a lot because it made the wet, for example, with this bullshit RNG into meta. It makes other players go crazy that they would demand nerfs to Ispel. Double Ball is supposedly a stupid move since aristocrats are expensive, so if you lack the units, you can't activate it, but then it still works. And lastly, Bribery is the ultimate RNG. People forget how unreliable this card is, and copying a card that only works with its own faction is more of a detriment, and yet NG players were versatile enough to make it work and do it twice with Stefan. A miracle is what seems impossible, but happens anyway, and if that's not bullshit, it's a pretty damn consistent miracle if you ask me.
Across the Empire.
The north.
Is it you? Not without good reason. Into the Valmora.
The hounds have come.
A sharp thing.
What do you leave me?
To arms!
If I must. I do not mince words on principle.
I am aware that Skell-like players are trying to point the finger at Nilf Giard, but hey, cut them some slack. They just can't take the heat of being number 1 in terms of win rates. The pressures of which Scoia'tael managed so peacefully. People are angry that this faction became so viable despite of not having much changes. The last time I remember, there were all about damage an enemy and boost self by that amount to begin with. I'm still against nerfs as well, that's why counters to great swords should be introduced in the next update. The obvious bullshit in this is that currently, there's nothing other factions could do. You can't go tall because of Mortvar and you can't go wide because of Wild Boar and Hemdall, revive them again with great swords and Dagur on the board, and it's just as much a mean joke as Philippa seizing 9 powered units plus. Yet this expansion promotes swarms and overboosting so much that it doesn't even matter carrying Leo because another 20 powered unit will just pop out 2 turns later.
Green skin freaks. A1 slot. Bolivia and
It wettest dreams!
At last, a worthy opponent.
Uncrate!
Check and mate.
Well, I think someone is either overconfident or angry.
Your head for that.
I don't know, but I think taunts should be meaner. I know that it's just adding more fuel to the fire, but doesn't anyone want to see the world burn?
Pathetic.
I guess it might be impossible since voice actors can be expensive. Then again, a mod could work though.
I owe you for
Shout out to BBB mods, maybe there's someone out there who wants to practice their taunts and send a recording to a mod maker for this game.
Pathetic.
Uncrate! My spirit's willing and
We'll find the princess and win.
Kill me first, you'll have to.
Pathetic. Pathetic.
Uncrate blood runs thick!
Pathetic. Pathetic. Pathetic.
For the Baron!
Pathetic. Pathetic.
Uncrate!
Pathetic.
Seen it all. Her Majesty knows what she's doing. Uncrate! The time has come!
Look who's pathetic now. Lastly, the faction that everyone overlooks, monsters. Deny it all you want, but there's something eerie how it's so easy to make a devotion deck for this faction, and ethereal in a non-devotion deck just works too well with monsters and not used at all by other factions as well. I guess this is the devs giving the faction some love, but it's just so bullshit that it has to be at the expense of other factions. I think this routine of nerfing cards should just stop for an update or two. They need to buff other cards instead. Like for example, 2 ethereals can't be destroyed simultaneously, unless damage engines were set up prior, but they were nerfed to the ground so. The next solution would be lock, but then, even monsters have Purify and Consume, and with Purify this encourages the use of Renew, so the Doom tag becomes meaningless. Leaving them alone was also a solution too, but monsters can fight back when you try to overboost and overswarm them as well. Lambert, Lacerate and Ignite could be a solution, but they break a lot of times due to the scarcity of monster players in the first place, so making a deck that specifically answers one faction doesn't bode well against other factions. People complain about SK and NG, but none bother checking who the actual top players are in this game and see what they mainly use. Demarcation, KAMS134, and Graves use NR, MO respectively. NR is a huge surprise though, but I remember Demarcation had MO as his most used faction in the first week of the expansion. So the bullshit here is that MO flew under the radar while a lot of people focused on SK and NG. MO might not have the most interesting combos, but the game plan is just too solid.
Prevent more. All these signs can.
See, this is why Ignite doesn't work. I'm not using fruits, so I have to rely on Death Wish and Consume, and since I don't need to fill the board to get a huge score, I don't get locked out of the game as well. MO is just perfectly balanced at the moment, a combination of tall and wide that even SK can't catch up. NG could not sabotage, NR could not wipe out, SC I don't know what they can do at this point, and Size Firesworn is a joking comparison. This is not even my favorite faction, but it deserves all the praises for its ingenuity. Believe it or not, other archetypes are still viable for monsters. You'll only see this type of deck everywhere because it's easier to pilot, and that efficiency is what makes this faction bullshit. All in all, it was a good first month for this expansion. It's such a shame that it took so long to make this video since I had to grind and collect more cards. Hopefully the next journey makes it easier on free-to-play players to get the cards needed to actually play the game. The cosmetics are already tantalizing enough to buy, so they shouldn't have to encourage kicks on new players. Then again, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but hopefully everything goes well for CDPR regardless of what actually is happening. Like Cyberpunk is already delayed long enough, although, I'd rather have a stable game from the get-go than a buggy one. I still remember the frustrations from Witcher 3, but still I loved it and replayed the game a lot. That's all the bullshit I could muster today. Thanks for watching.